Hi, my name is Camille Delaplane, and this presentation is on World War II, the Nazi invasion, and the concentration camps. The invasion of the Nazis. Hitler's invasion from the west of Poland on September 1, 1939, drove Great Britain and France to declare war. This was the beginning of World War II. Over the next 6 years, the conflict would take more lives and destroy more land and property than any other previous war. Among the 45 to 60 million killed were 6 million Jews murdered in Nazi concentration camps as part of Hitler's diabolical final solution. On September 17, Soviet troops invaded Poland from the east. Under attack on both sides, Poland fell quickly. By 1940, Germany and the Soviet Union divided control over the nation. Between 1939 in 1945, the Nazis established hundreds of concentration camps and extermination camps across Poland. On November 1939, Hans Frank declared all Jews had to wear an armband with the Star of David on it. Jewish business was seized, and all men were sent to forced labor. In 1940, Jews were forbidden to use trains. Throughout 1940 and 1941, the Nazis established hundreds of ghettos where Jews were forced to stay. The transportation of Jews. Jews were taken from their homes and told they were going to a resettlement. At the Wannsee Conference on January 20, 1942, the SS, Nazi Party, and German officers met to coordinate the deportation of Jews to extermination camps, some of which were already in operation. This final solution was estimated to deport and murder 11 million Jews. Both freight and passenger cars were used for deportation. Germans usually did not give the deportees food or drink for the journey, even when the journey would last days. The rail cars were overcrowded and riders suffered from extreme heat in the summer and extreme cold in the winter. Aside from a bucket, there was no sanitary facility. Lacking food and water, many did not survive to reach their destination. Armed police guards were ordered to accompany the transports and shoot anyone who tried to escape. The exploitation of Jewish women. In the Warsaw Ghetto, Naomi Levenkour explained that survivors felt shame and guilt, especially if they survived through the use of their sexuality. A woman who was used for her body in exchange for some food was defined as a prostitute rather than a person who was struggling for survival. These untold stories are unheard of because researchers did not or could not ask about sexual abuse. What was then termed as prostitution is now defined as sexual slavery. Whether the woman supplied sex for food, commodities, safety, or a chance to stay alive, there was no voluntary choice involved. Even though rape was forbidden by racial laws, which prohibited German soldiers from sexual relations with Jews, the abuse of Jewish women was omnipresent from the very first days in the city. Adolf Hitler. Hitler was screened for the Austrian military service in 1914 and was classified as unfit because of inadequate physical vigor. But when World War I broke out, he petitioned the King Louis III to be allowed to serve, and the king accepted. Hitler was deployed in 1914 to Belgium in the Battle of Ypres. He later took up political work in 1920 and was in charge of the party's propaganda and left the army to improve his position. In 1921, he became the Nazi Party's leader with almost unlimited powers. He was then imprisoned for treason and, while there, wrote his first autobiography. In 1930, Hitler made an alliance with Alfred Hugenberg. With his help of Hugenberg's newspaper, Hitler had a nationwide audience. On January 30, 1933, Hindenburg offered him chancellorship of Germany. When Hindenburg died, officers took an oath of alliance to Hitler personally. Hitler's purpose was to expel the Jews from Germany. In 1941, this policy changed to extermination. From 1934 to 1944, several unsuccessful attempts on his life were carried out. There were many types of camps built during the Holocaust. Transit camps were camps where prisoners were briefly detained till transport to other Nazi camps. Concentration and labor camps were places where people were concentrated and imprisoned without trial and exploited for labor. Extermination camps were used by Nazis from 1941 to 1945 to murder Jews. Not all Jews were exterminated. Some were selected to perform various jobs. Kelmo was the first extermination camp established in 1941. Its purpose was to murder Jews of the surrounding area and Lodz ghetto. It had 3 gas vans where victims were murdered with carbon monoxide poisoning. Other camps were built near railways for easy transport. Instead of gas vans, gas chambers were built and labeled as showers. Another camp, Auschwitz, was complex, consisting of a concentration, forced labor, and extermination camp. It had a network of more than 40 satellite camps. It originally only had 1 gas chamber, but 4 more were added. Approximately 1.1 million people were murdered in Auschwitz gas chambers. But not all prisoners in camps were Jewish. Catholics, homosexuals, Poles, Gypsies, and handicaps were also targets. Janowska concentration camp. In 1941, Germans set up a factory in the suburbs of Lvov to service the German army. Jews were forced to labor in these factories, and by 1941, 600 Jews worked there. At that point, the character of the factories changed. It became a restricted camp, and barbed wire was installed. Barracks were erected for inmates, and they each housed 2,000. Watchtowers were built around the camp about every 54 yards. The camp had originally been planned for Jews, but after several months, a special section was set up for the Poles. They were separated from the Jews and received better treatment, and were generally released from the camp after a period of detention. Kaiserwald concentration camp. Kaiserwald was a Nazi concentration camp near a village outside of Riga in Latvia. Built in 1943, the first inmates of the camp were several hundred convicts from Germany. In June 1943, the remainder of Jews in Latvia after the liquidation of the ghettos were deported to Kaiserwald. In 1944, small camps around Riga were brought under the jurisdiction of Kaiserwald. The inmates were put to work by large German companies, factories, mines, and farms. In July 1944, as the Soviet army approached the Latvian border, the Germans began evacuating inmates by boat to Stutthof. Thousands who were labeled as unfit for the journey were put to death prior to leaving, as well as those convicted of any offense, no matter how minor. By September 1944, all inmates had been moved, and the Red Army liberated the camp on October 13, 1944. All the documents and barracks were destroyed before the Red Army's arrival. Laszlo concentration camp was constructed in 1943 on the site of 2 Jewish cemeteries. 8,000 Jews that were deemed fit were rounded up and transferred to Plaszow. The remaining about 2,000 that were unfit were murdered in the streets. Now populated, Plaszow started off as a slave labor camp, but eventually was upgraded to a full concentration camp. Daily life was more horrendous than other camps, as their commandant, Goth, enjoyed torture and humiliating prisoners. Executions were a daily affair, and those that were executed were forced to stand naked, where they were shot in the back of the head, while the rest of the camp was forced to watch. After Goth's arrest, command went to Arnold Büchner. Though not a saint, he did up the rations and stop the random shootings and hangings that were a daily occurrence. Laszlo was closed in January 1945. The remaining inmates were marched off on foot to Auschwitz, where the majority died. By the time the Red Army rolled in on the 20th of January, all that was left of the horrifying place was a patch of scorched ground. Eamon Goth, originally from Austria, joined the SS in 1933. Once World War II began, Goth gained a reputation as a capable administrator, especially in the rounding up and relocating of Jews. This led to his transfer to Lublin, a Polish city, in 1942. There he helped establish extermination camps Treblinka, Sabador, and Belzec. It was then decided that a new labor camp was needed. Goth was chosen to oversee construction and later run it as well. The commandant was arrested on September 13, 1944, and charged with theft of state property, the mistreatment of prisoners, which is quite an achievement, all things considered, and allowing unauthorized access to camp records. By this time, thousands of men, women, and children had died under his command. He was confined to a hospital in Bavaria. He was then arrested by U.S. troops in 1945 and hanged for his crimes. Escape to freedom. Two men named Leo and Manfred were both successful in escaping from the 42 transport from Dresden to Auschwitz on November 6, 1942. They both understood that their deportation would end in death. With the help of others, they cut a hole in the roof and jumped from the moving train. Within the camps, some people joined underground groups and organized uprisings and mass escapes. On June 1942, a group of 4 men escaped Auschwitz by stealing SS uniforms, weapons, and a car while impersonating SS soldiers. In total, approximately 928 attempted escape from Auschwitz. Only 196 were successful. Once escaped, many Jews hid in places such as caves, cellars, attics, and barns. This type of hiding was often aided by non-Jewish people against the Nazi cause. Liberation. As the Soviet army advanced from the east, the Nazis transported the prisoners from the front deep into Germany. Some were transported by train, but most were forced to march hundreds of miles in the freezing cold without proper clothes or food. Some of the marches lasted weeks, and during this time, tens of thousands died of starvation, cold, or were shot for not keeping up. In January 1945, Auschwitz was liberated. Out of the million deported, only a few thousand remained. In every camp, Allied soldiers encountered appalling scenes. In Bergen-Belsen, soldiers found unburied bodies strewn around the camp, while in the barracks, some 60,000 starving and mortally ill people were packed together without food or water. After the liberation, the end of the Holocaust was in 1945, yet for many, liberation did not mean the end of their suffering. Survivors were often too ill to realize they had been liberated. Their joy of survival was immediately drowned with the realization of loss of family, home, business, and homelands. Bewildered and sick, survivors tried to return home in Eastern Europe. Many were murdered along the way or came home to be unwelcomed. Displaced persons camps is where they ended up, which were located in the lands of their perpetrators. These camps became new Jewish communities, although many left to the US, UK, or Canada to start new. These are sources from the HolocaustResearchProject.org, JewishLibrary.org, and History.com. These are sources continued from IWM.org, Exhibits.edu, and Gesture.org. These are my final sources from Britannica, theHolocaustExplained.com, theHolocaustExplained.org, and Jester.org. Thank you for watching this presentation.